In this lecture, we'll introduce predicates and quantifiers, and then look at how to translate different sentences that use quantifiers and predicates. Let's begin with predicates. Here we're going to talk about two different types of predicates. The first one is a one-place predicate, which captures the is of predication, if you've ever heard that phrase before. You have the is of predication, and then you also have the is of identity. Predicate logic can actually render both, but the symbolization would look different for each type of is to be able to capture those unique meanings. But here we're just going to talk about the is of predication. And if we look at the one-place predicates, you see that each of these statements has a subject. So the first one's Colby, then you have the sky, you have Snoopy, and the ocean. And then it says is blank, some sort of category, some type of trait, something that can be said of the subject. That's the predicate. So how do we ultimately symbolize these sentences? Well, it's pretty simple. What we do is we take the letter. Typically what we do is we take the letter associated with the predicate. So here, human, we capitalize it, that serves as the predicate, and then we lowercase the individual letters that are associated with the subjects. So here, since Colby is the subject, we attach it here in the first place as the constant. So these are constants here. And so the subject Colby is human. That's how this sentence gets read. And if you look at these other ones, so you have something that's blue. So the blue is the predicate. The sky is that something. So we can say that the sky is blue. Same thing with Snoopy. Snoopy is a beagle. So Snoopy is the constant. B is the category of beagle, or the predicate of beagle. And so Snoopy is a beagle. And then, as you can probably figure out, here on this last one, you have the ocean, which is your constant, and then largeness would be the predicate. So those one-place predicates, they always capture these is statements where we're attributing some predicate or some feature, characteristic, some category to the subject. Now we have two-place predicates, which is as far as we'll go in this lecture. So a two-place predicate captures a relationship between a subject and an object. So here, if we look at these sentences, we have a subject, Brian, who's doing what to Edith? Well, he's loving her. What's Jack doing to Carl? He's punching him. What's Mary doing to Heather? She's inviting her. What's the plane doing to the boat? Well, it's passing it. So each of these has two different constants in the sentences. You have Brian and Edith, those are two constants. Jack and Carl, those are constants. Mary and Heather, those are constants. The plane and the boat, both are constants. And so we have a subject-object relationship, and the predicate, the two-place predicate, is going to be able to render this relationship. So if we look at how these are symbolized, we have the first one. So who is doing the loving? Here, Brian is the one who loves Edith. So the B in the first place of the two-place predicate is the sort of active subject here, and then the constant in the second place of the two-place predicate is the sort of passive object, the one that the subject is doing whatever the predicate is related to. So Brian loves Edith. Then if we look at the next one, Jack punches Carl. So we're looking, the J symbolizes Jack, the C symbolizes Carl, and the P is the predicate that defines the relationship. And as you could probably guess with how these other ones go, so inviting is the predicate, and then Mary is the one doing it to Heather. And then this last one, the plane is the one that's passing the boat. So the active position is the first place, and then the passive one is the second place, or you can think subject, object, those types of relationships. At the beginning of the semester, when we were talking about propositional logic, I told you how propositional logic is pretty limited in how it translates these sentences. And typically when we reduce clauses or sentences down to single propositional letters, we lose a lot of the content that are associated with those sentences. And so predicates are one way to get more of the detail in a sentence out in our logical language and be able to symbolize them. Another feature of predicate logic that sort of gets to more of the meaning and content of the sentences themselves are quantifiers. So we have two different types of quantifiers. We have what's called a universal quantifier and an existential quantifier. So upside down A, I know it looks scary, but it just means all. And when we talk about the backwards E, it just means that there exists or something. So this is pretty typical with how we talk, right? When we are saying some sort of sentence or we're trying to make some type of claim, we usually restrict the scope in one way or another. This claim applies to all things or nothing or something, or some things are not this. And that's what these quantifiers are supposed to be doing. They are ways in which we can render sentences that do not have a specified constant or a specified individual or subject. So again, this is all about capturing more meaning in the sentences that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, and then we can know that our arguments are stronger by using this type of predicate logic structure. So we have these two different types of quantifiers, and if we look at our two different types of predicates, we have to have quantifiers. So here, quantifiers have variables, not constants. So the x is a variable here. Same thing with the x over here. Typically, we use x, y, and z. If you have a three-place predicate, then you usually go up to z. But here, we're just going to focus on two-place predicates. But these x's, y's, whatever's attached to the quantifier, those are variables. So if we look at our first statement, everyone is human. So if we remember from the last slide, I said Colby is human. Colby is a constant. Everyone is a universally quantified sentence here. So what we do is we just attach the universal quantifier to the front of our predicate, and then we place a variable here. I chose x in that one place predicate position, and that's just saying all things are human, or everyone is human. So you can probably see how this is going to play out. Something is blue, so blue was our predicate from the last slide where we said the sky is blue. So since we're saying something rather than all things are blue, we use our existential quantifier. Same thing as before, we just put the x in our first place predicate, and then we attach a existential quantifier to the front of that predicate. Now, if you look at this next one, here's more of a complex sentence. Hopefully you can see that it's a conditional statement. We have an if-then. So we have if no one is happy. So no one, that should be a universally quantified statement there. Because we're saying that this applies to no one. And then here we have everyone. Again, that's everyone. So that's an all statement. So we get something like this. We have a universal quantifier. The tilde is being attached to our predicate, which is happy. So it's important where we place this tilde, because if we place it in front of it, it changes the whole meaning of the statement. It's saying that nothing, it would say that it's not the case that all things are happy, which would suggest that there could be something or someone who is happy. Instead, what this is trying to say is that no one, we know that no one is happy. So that's why the tilde is attached to the H instead of to the front. So we'll do more practice with this to make it clear, but it's important to be cognizant of where you're placing this tilde, because it changes the meaning of the sentence. So here we're saying all things or no one is happy. So if that's the case, then everyone is sad. So all people are sad. And then you might think, well, where are the parentheses to make this a well-formed formula? So with quantifiers, they are treated like single letters in propositional logic. So these are, let me get my pen out. There we go. So these are like single letters in propositional logic. So these all get grouped together. This is just one term. So you don't have to worry about having parentheses here, separating them out, because the parentheses are going to be important for the scope of the quantifiers, which again, we'll get to that here in another slide. So let me get that erased, and then we'll look at our two-place predicates. So we have our two-place predicates down here. We have the statement, somebody loves everyone. This is where things get a little bit tricky. Again, this might look a little scary, but please don't be scared. Actually, I meant to say that. I'll come back to that in a second. So here, when we're looking at this, somebody loves everyone, right? So the L is our predicate. It has two places. And so who is the active, well, I guess, what is the active noun here? What is doing the loving? Well, it's somebody. Who's the passive object? It's everyone. So in this case, the X is attached to or associated with our existential quantifier, and the Y is associated with our universal quantifier, which is to say the X is the somebody, the Y is the everyone. So somebody X loves, capital L, and then everyone Y. So that's how we use these two-place predicates, and the quantifiers can change in one way or another. So just to get back to this, I forgot that I had it on the screen. The reason why I symbolize this statement two different ways is because of what I was just saying before, where if we put the tilde in front of the universal quantifier, it changes the whole meaning. But really, if we put a tilde in front of an existential quantifier here, it would mean there does not exist somebody who is happy, which is the same exact thing as saying everyone is not happy. So if there does not exist somebody who's happy, same thing as saying everyone is not happy. We'll talk about this more once we get to the quantifier exchange rule, but it's just important to know that these statements are actually equivalent and they mean the same exact thing. So sorry that I forgot to get that on the first run. So we have this two-place predicate. Let's look at these other two, and then let's do some translations. So second statement here, everyone hates Joe. Who is being hated? Well, it's Joe, so that's why Joe is in the second place. And we don't need a quantifier to be associated with Joe because Joe is a constant. It's a particular individual. So we're not saying all things are Joe or somebody is Joe. We're saying specifically everyone hates Joe. And so the X here in the two-place predicate is capturing that everyone, so that's the subject here. So everyone is the subject, Joe is the passive object, and we just fix this universal quantifier in front of the H, our predicate, to say that for this statement, X applies, or X refers to everyone, and then J is the constant, Joe. Now, it's important the position of the individual constants and variables, because let's just look at this one. Who's the active subject in this statement? Sarah dances with somebody. So Sarah is the one who's actively dancing with somebody. We don't know who that somebody is, that who the object is definitively. So we're going to need a quantifier since it's a somebody and not everybody. We're going to use an existential quantifier, and we need to place the variable in the second place of the two-place predicate. Why? Because that's the one that is being acted upon by our constant here, who is Sarah in this case. So Sarah, the constant, is the one dancing with somebody, right? So again, I know this is going to look a little odd to you at first, so let's just do some translations. Over the next 3 slides, I have 12 translations that I want to do for practice. So let's look at each of them. Try to stop the video on each of the slides. I'll give you a second for each slide so you can maybe try them on your own, and then resume this video and we can talk through them. So I'll give you like 5 seconds to pause the video if you want to pause it and try these, and then play it once you're done. So let's look at each of these statements. Let's look at this first one here. So we have, if Jack's car is blue, then Sarah's car is red. The best thing to do is to look for our operators, just like what we were doing in propositional logic. So we have if then. So I know that I'm going to need an arrow to symbolize that relationship. And then here I have in the parentheses the different predicates to use. So blue is a predicate, red is a predicate, and the question is who or what does this predicate apply to? So if we look at the first statement, we have if Jack's car is blue, well, it's Jack's car that is blue. So we'll have the B, the capital B, as a predicate, and then we'll use J to symbolize Jack's car. And then here on this other side, we have a R as our predicate. So we'll make it a capital R, and then use S to symbolize Sarah's car. So J being blue, that's Jack's car is blue. And then S to R, that's Sarah's car is red. So if Jack's car is blue, then Sarah's car is red. If we look at this second sentence, hopefully you can see that we're going to have a two-place predicate. So we've got here, Milton loves Tracy if and only if Tracy loves Milton. So again, first step is looking at the operator that's functioning within this statement. So we have an if and only if, that should be a biconditional. And then here, L is going to be a two-place predicate because it's a relationship. It's defining some sort of relationship between a subject and an object. Who's our subject in this first part of our biconditional? Well, Milton is the one who's loving Tracy. And if we look at the other side of our biconditional, well, now the subject is Tracy who's loving Milton. So that's why their positions change within the two-place predicates. The predicate is still the same. L and L both symbolize love, that relationship. In the left side of our biconditional, it's referring to Milton who loves Tracy, and on the right side of the biconditional, it's Tracy who loves Milton. So that's capturing those unique relationships with the same predicate. Now if we look at this third statement, we have if somebody is late, then everybody is penalized. Here you should be able to see that we're going to need two different quantifiers. Somebody, so that's an undefined person or individual, that's going to need an existential quantifier. And then everybody, that's going to need an universal quantifier because that's an all statement. And then we have an if-then statement, so that's going to be on our normal arrow. So let's look at how this is going to play out. So here is our if-then with our arrow, and if we look at our antecedent, so if somebody is late, so L is our one-place predicate. Who is the person being late? Well, we don't know, but we know that it doesn't apply to everybody. It's just saying if there exists somebody who is late, that's the antecedent, and then the consequent, then everybody is penalized. So P is our predicate for penalized, and then who is that applying to? Well, it's applying to everybody. So we use a universal quantifier to capture that relationship. And it's totally fine to use the same variable when the quantifier scope is limited to a single letter. But as we'll move on to more complicated statements here in the next couple of slides, you'll see that the scope of the quantifier can be extended over a whole statement. So more on that here in a moment. Looking at our last example though, so we have Fernando's bike is expensive, but it is not fancy. So we've got a few operators here. We've got a but, which should be an ampersand, and we have a not, which is a tilde. We have two different predicates. We have expensive and fancy. And what is the subject here? Well, the subject is Fernando's bike. So I'm just going to use F to symbolize that. So what we get is something like this. Fernando's bike is expensive at this capital E lowercase f, but it is not tilde, ampersand tilde, and then not fancy. Still, Fernando's bike is the subject here. So what is not fancy? Well, it's Fernando's bike. So that's why we use the same lowercase f in both of these one-place predicates, because they are both referring to the same constant, which is Fernando's bike. Before I pause the video and let you try these on your own, I want to introduce this idea of scope and quantifiers, as I was mentioning on the previous slide. So if we think back to the last practice problem on the previous screen with Fernando's bike. Fernando's bike was the same constant that was fixed to the predicate that referred to expensiveness, and then Fernando's bike was also fixed to the other conjunct, which was not fancy. So in that case, we were trying to pick out a specific constant and make a more compound statement in which the constant is the same in both of those, or throughout that compound statement, I guess I should say. Now, when we use quantifiers, we want to make claims that are also compound statements, but they pick out specific individuals that would fit whatever that statement is. And so we have a scope that's fixed to a quantifier and encapsulates a whole statement. So if we look at this first statement, no one is both a Bengals fan and a Steelers fan. And if you remember on that slide with quantifiers where I talked about how these types of statements can be symbolized in two different ways, I'll show that again here and explain it a little bit more. So one way to symbolize this sentence is like this, which is to say it's not the case that there exists somebody. That's what this first bit is saying. It is not the case, tilde, that there exists existential quantifier. And then our X is picking out a specific somebody that applies in each of these instances. So there does not exist somebody that is both a Bengals fan, B would be our predicate for Bengals fan, and then S is our predicate for Steelers fan. And so this X is picking out the same somebody. That same somebody is not a Bengals fan and not a Steelers fan. We can also symbolize it this way, which is say everyone is such. So everyone is such, that's the universal quantifier. And then not, so everyone is such that they are not both a Bengals fan and a Steelers fan. Again, the X is picking out the same exact somebody in both of these cases. And so that's the scope of the quantifier. The parentheses are indicating the scope of it, to say that this X applies all the way throughout this statement. So that's where these quantifiers can get more tricky, and we want to make sure that we're delineating the correct scope with our quantifiers. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple seconds to pause the video to try these other three, and then we'll go through them. So. Okay, let's look at these. This first one, or I guess the second one on the screen, I guess I should say, is going to use quantifier again. So all things are such. So all things, that should immediately tip you off that that's the universal quantifier. That if they are dry, then they are not wet. So if, then, right? We have an if-then statement. That's a conditional. And then we have dry, which is a one-place predicate. You can see are is a type of, it's a conjugation for the verb to be, which, is, same thing here. Are is a form or conjugation of the verb to be. So there again, indicating the is of predication. So we have two different types of predicates, or two different predicates, I guess I should say, not two different types because they're both one-place predicates, but dry and wet, and then we also have this negation here that we need to be mindful of. So what's this look like? Universal quantifier again, because we have all things are such, so that's what the universal quantifier is saying. And then again, the scope of this statement is that this variable should pick out the same individual. So X is the same individual that if they are dry, then they are not wet. And it's important to have this scope delineated correctly to be able to capture the meaning of the sentence, because if we use different variables in different places, then we ultimately change the whole meaning behind the sentence. And so it's important to know what variable is being attached to which predicate, and the scope of each of those quantifiers in those senses. So there's the first one. Now this one will not have parentheses because we have this conditional statement again. We have an if then, we have a not, so there's another tilde. But if we look at the consequent here, Bob is not happy, that's a specific individual. So Bob will be our constant that will be in our one place position of our happy predicate, or our H. And then if we look at the antecedent here though, if somebody distracts Bob, who is distracting Bob? Well, it's not immediately clear, it's not defined. There just exists somebody who's distracting Bob. So that's going to be an existential quantifier. So what this ends up translating into is something like this. The antecedent has the existential quantifier. It's a two-place predicate where the somebody is the subject. What are they doing? They are distracting. And who is the object that's being distracted? Well, it's Bob. So there exists somebody, X, who is distracting, capital D, and then Bob is our constant here. Then if we look at our consequent, just like I was saying before, H is our one-place predicate because we have the is here. That indicates that this is a one-place predicate, not a relationship, because there's nobody, there's no object related to Bob here. Bob is just in a state of being unhappy. So if there exists somebody who is distracting Bob, then Bob is not happy. I know it's a weird way to read the sort of structure of these symbolizations or these translations, but it's just important to recognize where the different pieces are. So the constant, like B, refers to a specific individual, in this case Bob. The X is a variable that's saying somebody, and then the different predicates, those are the ones in parentheses up here in the statement. So D, distracting, that's a relationship. H, happy, that's just a characteristic of Bob's state. So if we look at this last sentence now, we have a conjunction. So some people are popcorn eaters and soda drinkers. So that's an and. Who is the person that's a popcorn eater and a soda drinker? Well, we don't know exactly who that is, so we know we're going to need a quantifier. What is the sort of or who is this statement applying to? Well, it's not applying to everybody, it's just applying to some people. So since it's some people, just like up here it's somebody, we're going to use an existential quantifier, and then we're going to place the variable in our one-place predicates for P as a popcorn eater and S as a soda drinker. So the same person is both a popcorn eater and a soda drinker. That's what these parentheses are suggesting. That's the limiting of the scope of the quantifier. Before I give you the chance to pause the video and try these out on your own, I want to talk about the first one because this is going to be a little bit complicated based on what we've talked about in the past. So just like with the last slide, I want to talk about the first one. I'll give you a chance to pause the video, and then you can try the other three on your own. So if we're looking at this first statement, all mammals are warm-blooded. You might think, wow, there are no keywords that are associated with the operators, so I guess I'm not using any operators, but that would be incorrect. There is a way to capture the meaning of the sentence that isn't as straightforward as the other sentences that we've looked at. So we have to think about, what is this sentence trying to convey? We have two different predicates, or I guess two different predicates that are being used in this sentence. We have mammals, so that's a predicate, and we have warm-blooded, that's a predicate. Both of them are single place predicates because we have the is of predication here as captured by the are. So both of these are going to be single place predicates. And what's this sentence saying? It's saying all, so that's going to be a universal quantified sentence. All things are such that if they are mammals, then they are warm-blooded. And so we would translate this sentence in this way. So just to say that again, based on the sort of elements within this sentence, we have an all statement, so that's the universal quantifier here. All things are such. That's all this universal quantifier is saying. All things are such that if that thing is a mammal, then that same thing is also warm-blooded. So it's an if-then statement. It's a conditional statement that doesn't really give us the keywords that we are accustomed to seeing in our typical conditional phrases. And the reason for that is because this is sort of defining what our quantifier is applying to. So all things, well, we're not really wanting to capture all things. We're really just wanting to capture all things that are mammals. So that's why this if statement here. And so if they are mammals, what happens, or what's the relationship? Maybe relationship is the incorrect word because we don't have a two-place predicate. But what can we also say about that individual? Well, it's also going to be warm-blooded. So this predicate, this mammal predicate here, is just pretty much trying to restrict what the all is being applied to. So with that, try these other three on your own and then resume the video. Okay, so here we've got another statement where some cats like Lauren. We have, again, two predicates, but we have actually two different types of predicates. Cats, that's a one-place predicate because some things are cats. That's what this first part is saying. That's the is of predication. That indicates a one-place predicate. And then like, that is a relationship with a subject-object. So who is the subject, or what is the subject? Well, it's some cats. Some cats like who? What's our object? In this case, it's a constant. It's Lauren. So this would get translated like this. The existential quantifier has a scope that extends to the entire statement because it's the same some individual that we're picking out. So some individual that if it's a cat, then that cat likes Lauren. So the lowercase l applies or is corresponds to Lauren in the statement, and the capital L corresponds to our two-place predicate, which is like. So to sort of go back over this sentence, the existential quantifier is saying something. I don't know what that thing is, but there is something. And then this antecedent in our conditional statement, this CX, it's saying that something is a cat. So if that something is a cat, then that something likes Lauren. So there exists something that is a cat that likes Lauren. And if we look at this second one, we have, this case, two single place predicates. So some things are birds. There's that implied R that is of predication. So some things are birds. And what's the other part? They are unable to fly. So again, we're going to have an existential quantifier for this some statement. So there exists something that if it's a bird, the antecedent, then it cannot fly, or it is unable to fly. So fly is our consequent predicate, or the predicate that's in the consequent. And then we're trying to say that it's the same individual that if it's a bird, then it can't fly. So some things are such that if it's a bird, then it cannot fly. And if we look at this last sentence, so it is not the case that all birds are able to fly. So I'm just going to use the translation that makes the most sense, but we could also write this as an existential quantifier on the outside and then a tilde on the inside, so it would look something like this. Excuse the bad handwriting. But remember that this quantifier, or this arrangement, I guess I should say, with the tilde, can be reversed to have an existential quantifier out front and then the tilde inside, because really what this sentence is saying is that there exists something that it is not, or it is not the case that all things. So all we're trying to say here is that this does not universally apply to everything. So if there exists something that's not whatever this statement is, that's the same thing as saying not everything has this statement applied to them. Hopefully that makes sense. I know that sounded a little confusing, but based on the way in which this sentence is, the way in which this sentence begins with "it is not the case," I just immediately think it is not the case, so tilde out front. And then we have all, so that's our universal quantifier. It's not the case that all birds are able to fly. So here, universal quantifier saying that if that thing is a bird, then it is able to fly. So it is not the case, that's the tilde. Universal quantifier, that's saying that's picking out the same individual for each x, and it's everything. It's not the case that everything, that's the universal quantifier, is such that if it's a bird, bx, then it can fly, fx. So again, we could rewrite this in another way in which we had the existential quantifier on the outside and the tilde on the inside, but I just like writing it this way because you have the "it's not the case." But hopefully you can see the meaning of this sentence is captured in both of those translations or symbolizations.